everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be doing my May wrap up, and this month I read 26 books, which is actually more than I thought I did. For some reason I felt like this month was really slow, but did pretty good, so let's just get right into the books I read. So when I left off my April wrap-up, I had just read Clipped Wings by Helena Hunting, and I did end up finishing that series. So the first two books I read for May were Inked Armor and Fractures in Ink. Inked Armor is the second book to Clipped Wings. It's the same couple. It's still Hayden and Tenley's story. The first one, Clipped Wings, sort of ends on a cliffhanger, and so Inked Armor continues their story. And then Fractures in Ink is a different couple from the same tattoo shop, but still, like, Hayden and Tenley are still around, obviously, and so that's their story. And these both I really liked. I gave Inked Armor 5 stars and Fractures in Ink 4 stars, just because I think I have like a special place for Hayden and Tenley in my heart, and so the other couple was not as interesting to me. Like, it was interesting to see their story, but like Hayden and Tenley are like my number ones. And next after that I read Get Inked, which is obviously also by Helena Hunting, and this is a Pucked Clipped Wings crossover novella, and it was so good. Like, for a novella I don't really usually anticipate much, and with this series, for whatever reason, there are like 4 novellas I think that go with it. Like, there's so many of them, and some of them are kind of useless. Like, I read one of them that goes before the first book, I think, and it wasn't really necessary. But this one I was really excited about, because if you have watched my videos, you know I loved the Pucked series, and I also loved Clipped Wings. So the fact that there is like even a book in existence where the two cross over just like had my heart. And so I read this one. I really liked that it focused mostly on Randy from the Pucked Boys, because the whole time I was reading Clipped Wings I kept sort of imagining Hayden as being almost like looking like a brother to Randy. Like, in my head they looked very similar, and so having them sort of interact with each other and their girlfriends was really cute, and I really liked this one. Next, while I was still on the Helena Hunting like bandwagon, I was going through all of her books because I am literally obsessed with her. And the next book I read was A Lie for a Lie, which is actually, it's the first book in the All In series, which is a spin-off to the Pucked series, which I didn't realize when I started it. I probably would have read it so much sooner if I had known that that's what it was. But it's basically just like a continuation of that series. At least the first one is. I'm not sure, like, I haven't read the other 3 yet, so I'm not sure if they follow similar characters. This one I think I gave 4 stars, but probably more like 4.5, because I would probably go back and reread this one, and that's like sort of how I've been determining 4 and 5 stars recently. But this one I really liked because it's about a guy who goes to Alaska for the summer. He's a professional hockey player, obviously, because that's like what the Pucked series is. And he goes to Alaska every summer for like 2 weeks or something with his brother and his dad as sort of like a family like bonding thing. But his dad has since passed, and his brother's wife is pregnant and is having like some minor issues, so he doesn't want to leave her. And so this hockey player decides he's going to go to Alaska on his own and go fishing for the 2 weeks and whatever and stay at their cabin. And while he is on his way there, he meets this girl who at first he thinks she's like a fangirl because she literally falls in his lap. And on his previous flight, a woman actually like literally threw herself in his lap. So he thinks this girl is just like the same thing, but she has no idea who he is. And she ends up spending a lot of time with him in Alaska when they get there. And he ends up having to leave rather abruptly, and they think that they've left each other a way to contact each other, but they really haven't. So a year goes by where they haven't contacted each other at all because they couldn't get in contact with each other, and then they bump into each other at an aquarium. But this one is really good. I love like Alaska books, if you know. Like, The Simple Wild is my favorite book ever, so any book that can incorporate Alaska and hockey players into it is going to be good in my books. So like I said, really like this one. Next, I read some Abbi Glines books. The first one was The Vincent Boys, and this one I was really excited about. For whatever reason, this has been on my radar since like I first started getting into the romance genre last year, and I read it, and I gave this one 2 stars. It's honestly probably my least favorite Abbi Glines book that I've ever read. If I had to guess and I didn't know better, I would have guessed that this was her first book, but it wasn't. It is very much sort of like, I felt like the whole plot was the trope, if that makes sense. Like, it's basically supposed to be like kind of like a good girl, bad boy kind of book. But I felt like that was the whole plot of the book, was he's a bad boy and she's the good girl kind of thing. Next was Like a Memory, and this is the first book in the Seabreeze meets Rosemary Beach series. If you didn't know, Abbi Glines has two big series, Seabreeze and Rosemary Beach, and this sort of spin-off series focuses on the kids from those two series sort of getting together. And so this book is about Bliss York, who is the daughter of a Seabreeze couple, and Nate Finley, who is the son of the couple from the first couple books of the Rosemary Beach series. And they basically meet like years ago on the beach one summer, and she thinks that, I think she has like a crush on him and she thinks they're gonna get together or whatever, but they obviously both go back to their respective like hometowns, and she ends up having something sort of traumatic happen in her life. I can't remember if it says it on the back of the book, so I'm not going to say it. But she has something that goes on in her life that sort of stops her from contacting him ever again, or like going back to this beach. And it's now like years later, and she is moving to this town to sort of start her life. I think she's like in her early 20s, and she's moving back to start her life, get a job, you know, move on. And she moves and gets a job, and while she's working at this job, she finds out that the owner of this store that she's working at is Nate's fiance. So she ends up obviously running into him again, and Nate's fiance is kind of a jerk. Like, she's like pretty shallow, but he wants that. And so he's like, no, this is like what I want, like I'm happy, blah blah blah. And she's like, oh, he's not who I thought he was. But I really liked it. I gave this one 4 stars. I am excited to see what the other two in the series have going on. Next was The Intimacy Experiment by Rosie Danan. This is the second book. I don't know if it's like a series. Maybe it's not. It's like sort of like a spin-off of The Roommate, which I really liked The Roommate. But this one follows Naomi Grant, who is Josh's like ex/business partner in The Roommate. And she is sort of trying to create this class for modern intimacy, and she ends up, this like rabbi approaches her, and he's like young, like they're the same age. He approaches her and he's like, I'm trying to build up my, like, I can't remember the word for it, but like their like church following kind of thing. And she's like, okay, like that's not really my scene, like I don't do religion. And he's like, no, that's fine, like it's not really, like that won't matter. And so she agrees to help him, and they sort of go from there, and there's like some issues with like people protesting her like being a part of it and whatever. But for me, like this one was just like 3 stars. I didn't love it. I think The Roommate really like set the bar for what Rosie Danan's future books would like sort of consist of. And one issue that I had with The Roommate was that it took me a long time to get into it. Like it was very slow to start off, and I found this book didn't have that problem at the beginning, but towards the middle I was kind of like, okay, like I would like to speed things up a bit here, and this is taking too long. So it's not my favorite, probably wouldn't reread again. The next 3 books I read all go together, and I'm so excited to talk about them because I'm obsessed with them. And that is Him, Us, and Epic by Elle Kennedy and Serena Bowen. And you probably know Elle Kennedy is the author of the off-campus Briar U books, and Serena Bowen also has her own hockey series. I think it's called the Ivy Years, maybe. It's very similar to sort of like the off-campus vibes, so if you're looking for something like that, that's a good series to go for. But this series follows 2 boys who get together, and basically the story is like they were friends when they were kids. They went to this hockey camp every summer together, and they were best friends the whole time. And then the last night of their last year at this camp, something happens that makes one of them kind of like pull away from the other. Like they stop contacting each other so much and whatever, and he just like doesn't, he's trying to distance himself from him, not because he like hates him or anything, but just because he's not sort of comfortable with what happened. But it's not what you think. So it's like they sort of stop talking for years, they get out of touch, and then it's their senior year of college. They're both of their college teams are in the like championship or whatever it's called, like the final game, and they end up meeting at the hotel, and one of them is like, oh, you know, like I wish like we had stayed friends and whatever, and like one kind of extends an olive branch, and they sort of rekindle their friendship. And Wes finds out that Jamie has still been going back to this camp to work there every summer, and he decides he's gonna like apply or call the coach or whatever to like get a job there that summer too, so that they can sort of like keep rekindling their friendship. But at that point, Jamie doesn't know that Wes is gay, and he's not like out, like he's out to his team, but he's not very like publicly out, I guess. And so when he shows up, he's kind of like, hey, like, I wanted to come back, but only if it's cool with you, kind of thing. And he like tells him and everything, and it goes from there. But this like whole series is so cute. Like, I literally, my heart was like exploding. And then in Us, there is I gave these all 5 stars, by the way. In Us, one of Wes's teammates on his team that he's playing on moves in to the apartment like above him, and the teammate's name is Blake. And throughout Us, he drove me crazy. I couldn't stand Blake, like just wanted him gone. Like, I kept hoping he was gonna like move out or disappear or whatever. But he sort of, by the end of Us, you're kind of like, okay, maybe Blake's not so bad, you know. And so he does have his own book, which was the next book I read, which is Good Boy. And I hate the title of this book, and I don't even know really why it's titled that, but that's what it's called. And this is the first in the Wags series, and I think there's only 2 books out in it. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't read the second one yet. But this one follows Jamie's sister. I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now. Jamie's sister and Blake from Wes's hockey team. And this one I really, really love. This one has like so many off-campus like Briar U vibes, because the sister is in nursing school, and so it's still like, even though Blake is like a professional hockey player, he's not in college anymore, she is still in college, so it still has that sort of college aspect to it if you're looking for that. And so I really, really like this one. And the best part about this for me was that it was literally like off campus but set in Toronto. And if you know me, you know I like live pretty close to Toronto. I went to school in Toronto for a while, and so it was just really cool to like sort of have that, because one of the things I've noticed recently is like all these Canadian authors write these hockey books, but none of them ever take place in Canada. And I've always thought that was so strange, because I would think that they could write Canada better than, you know, an American city, but they always seem to shoot for the American cities. I don't know why, but I was really excited about that, so I gave this one 5 stars as well. I did really, really like this one. It's super, super cute, and yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about that, because like obviously there's so much like interconnected stuff in there that I'd have to like spoil so much to even like get into any of that. But definitely check out like the Him series 100% if you haven't read it yet, and also like Good Boy is really good as well. Next is Credence by Penelope Douglas, and this one I had heard a lot about, but also like nothing about at the same time. I had heard enough to know kind of what to expect, but still not quite enough to really know what to expect. This book is kind of crazy, if you've never heard of it. It's basically about this girl who, her parents are like famous actors, I think, and they both kill themselves together because her dad is dying of a terminal illness anyway, and her mom just like can't live without him, kind of thing. And this sort of like story behind that is that like this daughter has never felt loved by them, because they just loved each other so much that they just like ignored her basically. And she's had like nannies and whatever that raised her, and so when both her parents die, she's not even really like sad about it. She is just kind of like, okay, like moving on with my life. And she's 2 months away from turning 18, I think, so she gets a call from her step uncle, who she's never met. I don't even know if she knew that she had this step uncle, but he calls her and he's like, hey, you know, I don't want to like uproot your life or whatever, like if you want to just like get emancipated and like keep living how you're living, like that's totally fine with me, like I'll help you with the process and whatever, or you can come live in this like cabin in the mountains with me and my 2 sons. And she's kind of like going back and forth, like one, obviously she doesn't want to go like live with this stranger, but she's also like trying to get away from basically like the paparazzi and the press and whatever, because her parents are very like high profile actors. And so she ends up deciding she's going to go to this cabin to like get away from it all, kind of thing. And she goes there, moves in with this guy and his 2 sons, and basically you just have to remember that they're not actually related. And I feel like that's enough to give you an idea of what happens in this book. But I gave this one 4 stars. I thought this was going to be a 5-star for me, but honestly I was expecting some like big crazy thing to be like the reason for why the guys were the way they were in like the first 300 pages of the book. And honestly, like if I didn't know that Penelope Douglas doesn't really write like paranormal romance type things, I was honestly expecting these guys to be like werewolves or something. Like that's where my brain was going. Next is The Year We Fell Down by Serena Bowen, and this is the first book in the Ivy Years series that I was just talking about. And in this book, it's sort of interesting because it's a lot different than any other hockey romance book I've ever read, because both players are actually sort of like not playing hockey during this book. One of them is this girl who got in a accident and can no longer walk, like presently, like she's not totally incapable of walking ever, but like for right now she's in a wheelchair, and she just started college, and she has sort of been put in this dorm with like the accessible apartments and whatever. So she's living in this dorm and she's just like not really like feeling it. Like a lot of the things in the campus are sort of hard for her to access and whatever, and she sort of feels left out. But she meets this guy across the hall who is there on crutches, who like broke his leg, I think, and he is someone who used to play on the university's hockey team, but he is like obviously not playing that season because his leg is broken. But he's actually friends with her brother who was on the hockey team, and he comes over, like, and introduces himself, like, when she's first moving in, and then a couple days later he shows up at her apartment and he's like, hey, my roommate owned our TV and I owned the video game console, so now I have a video game console and no TV, so do you mind if I, like, use yours to play, like, my, like, hockey, whatever video, they call it something different in the book than what it's called in real life, but it's basically like the equivalent of like NHL 20 or whatever those like Xbox games are, where they like play hockey virtually. And so he keeps coming over to like play this game with her, and she starts getting into it and playing it, and she's beating him all the time and just like really like getting to know him. But he has a girlfriend, but she's like off in Paris for the first part of the book, so she's not even there, and she's sort of a jerk to him, which seems to be like a recurring theme lately in the books I've been reading. She's sort of a jerk, and he is kind of just like dealing with it because he thinks that like dating this girl would be like more impressive and whatever. And so it's just sort of their relationship blossoming from their like unfortunate circumstances. And so like I said, I thought this one was really interesting. It was a lot different than any of the ones I've read. I gave this one 3 stars because I don't know that I would read it again, but I did really like it. Next is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, and I'm not really going to get into what this book is about because I feel like everyone's heard about it, but I will say I gave this book 4 stars, and I didn't love it as much as I thought I would, but I think that was like totally my fault because I've heard about this book online for over a year, so I have heard enough to like piece together a lot of the book. And also I saw this review like a couple days before I picked up the book that kind of ruined something for me, and so I think that was why I didn't enjoy this one as much as I thought I would. But it was like a good book. But honestly, like I think Credence and Birthday Girl are probably my higher ranked Penelope Douglas books. Like Punk 57 definitely wasn't my favorite, even though I know it is a lot of people's favorite. But yeah, like I said, it was good, but I think the hype just kind of like ruined it for me. Then I read some more Abbi Glines books, and the first one of this batch was About Tomorrow, which I think is her newest release right now. And this one I really, really liked up until like the last chapter, and I remember watching Lovely Like Laura's video where she mentioned this book and she said something very similar, and I didn't really understand why until obviously I read the book, and now I'm like, okay, I totally like agree with what she said about this. Basically, this is a book about a girl who moves back to her, I guess it's not her hometown, but it's like where she spent her summers because her grandmother lived in this town, and her grandmother has passed and she has inherited the house. And so she moves back with her boyfriend, and for the first couple days she's staying with her boyfriend while the movers like bring all her stuff to her grandmother's house, and she's staying with him in his condo that's like an hour away from the house. And they've decided that because she's done with school, she'll move into the house and he'll live in this like campus apartment to be closer to his school because he's like in med school. And so for the first couple days she's staying with him in his apartment, and his roommate is there, and his roommate's cousin is this boy that she used to date like back when she was there during the summers, when she was probably like 16, I think is the last time they saw each other or something. And something happens the last summer she's there, and he just like cuts her off and like never contacts her again, even though they were literally dating. Like he doesn't even break up with her, he just never contacts her again. And she leaves for the summer and obviously never hears from him. So she shows up, and then obviously here this guy is again, but she's there with her boyfriend. So she spends the weekend there, and he's kind of pretending that like they haven't met and whatever. And then she moves into her grandmother's house, and all of a sudden these people start like showing up at the grandmother's house being like, "Oh, do you have enough firewood? Like, do you, is this going okay? Like, whatever." And she keeps kind of like wondering like why all these people are like so concerned about her, and she finally like starts asking them, and they're like, "Oh, well, the guy, I'm pretty sure his name was Creed." They're like, "Oh, well, like Creed called me and like told me to check to make sure you had enough firewood and whatever." And she's realizing that even though he's not like there with her, he's watching out for her. And her boyfriend is like super busy with med school, totally ignoring her, like won't even text her back in the same day. And she's like getting really tired of it. She finally gets like a job in this town, and she's really excited about it, and her boyfriend like won't even, like, he's like, "I don't have time to talk to you," basically. And when he does talk to her, he only talks about himself. And so the whole time you're kind of just like getting more annoyed at her boyfriend. And so obviously eventually she starts getting closer to Creed because he ends up spending a lot of time around her, and it goes from there. But like I said, this book was really good up until the last chapter. The last chapter sort of took it down a few stars for me. The next books I read by Abbi Glines were another series, and it was the Sweet series, which includes 4 books, and the first 3 follow the same girl, and the 4th one is about like her neighbors kind of. And this series was so interesting to me because it did something that I've never read a series that did before, and I don't want to say what it is because it'll totally ruin like the entire like first and probably second book for you. But if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. It starts out with this girl who's got this job working for this woman, and basically how she got this job is her mom was dying of pneumonia, I think, and one of the last days that she's alive, she gives her this paper and says, like, contact this woman and she'll take care of you. And so she calls this woman, and this woman hires her to be like her housekeeper. And this girl also has a twin sister, Heidi. She has Down syndrome. And so she's in like this special like home where like she lives with other kids that do. And I guess they're not kids, they're like early 20s. So she like lives in this like home and whatever. And part of her deal with this woman is that like she pays for Heidi's care and like for her to live in this house. And she doesn't get paid like a ton for working for her because most of the money goes to that. And then this woman's son shows up at home, and she can't figure out why he's being like so bossy. Like, he's acting like he can fire her, and his friends are all jerks to her because she's the help and whatever. And there's this whole like thing that goes on, and it gets really crazy really quick with this series. It's just, I can't even tell you what the next books are about because like I literally can't, but it's really good. I think I gave all of these 4 stars, except for the last one I gave 3 stars because it was about the neighbors, and that one had like a weird time jump, and the ending didn't really like feel like the end to me. Like, I felt like there were still parts of the book missing, and so that was why that one wasn't my favorite. So the next couple books that I read all kind of fall into the same category, and so I'm not going to go super deep into these books because I do plan on doing a full video about these, and basically these are high school bully romances. But the first one I read was Cruel Prince by A. Jade. I think this is one of the more popular ones, and this one was actually so crazy and so good, but also like ripped my heart out and like ran it over with a truck, but like I still loved it. This one is about this girl who grew up in this town where she became friends with this boy on the playground because they both of their mothers had died, and they sort of like bonded over that. And so that's like in 4th grade they become like best friends, and they hang out like every day, I guess, for 5 years. And then at the end of, I think it's either 8th grade or 9th grade, she just like disappears one day. Her dad calls her and is like, "Hey, we're moving like tomorrow." And she moves, and the boy knows she's moving. Like, she tells him, "Oh my god, my dad got this job, we're leaving." And she leaves, and all this crazy stuff goes down, but she doesn't know because she's left. And she ends up returning to this town 3 years later for her senior year because her dad has now been arrested and is in prison. And so she's moved in with her aunt and uncle, or her aunt and her step-uncle and her step-cousin, who she's never met before. And he is best friends with this guy that she knew growing up. And as soon as she hears his name, she's like so excited. She's like, oh my gosh, like we can like reconnect. Like he never answered any of my calls when I left, but I, you know, really missed him and I wanted to talk to him, whatever. And she shows up at school and he is just like horrible to her, and like so is her step cousin, and the whole school starts bullying her, and she just can't figure out why he hates her so much. And his whole family, like he has like other siblings, his whole family starts being jerks to her as well, and she just has no idea why they hate her so much. But this one was, like I said, it was so good, it was so heartbreaking, but like so good. The next one I read was Untouchable by Sam Mariano, and this one I gave 1 star and actually wrote a Goodreads review for, which like if you know me, I like never write Goodreads reviews, so this one was a lot. I'm going to talk more about this one probably because I'm not going to include this in the recommendation video because it was bad. This one I think had potential, like the storyline definitely had potential, but like I said, if you want to go read my Goodreads review, I'll have like my Goodreads link below. But my biggest issue with this book was the fact that I would say 80% of the physical aspect of this book was non-consensual, and not just like, I feel like there's sort of a line where like sometimes the girl is like, no, like I don't want to, but like you're in her head and you can see that like she actually like does want to or whatever. But this was like straight up like she didn't want anything to do with him, she was trying to get away from him like all the time, whatever. And there was just so many like, I mean like, I don't know, so many issues with this book. Like I think if you want to write a book about what this book is about, there are ways to do it and depict it in ways that are safe and like, I don't know, just safe is like the word that came to mind a lot in this book, and this was not it. In this book, it's basically about a girl who reports a football player from her high school team for harassing her at a party, and he gets benched for I think the rest of the season. And so somehow the 3 guys on this football team think that the way to like avenge this is to harass her again and then assault her in a classroom, hoping that that would somehow make her like take back her like accusations, which like makes no sense whatsoever. But basically that's like the only bullying that goes on in this book. I put in my Goodreads review too, I don't even consider this a bully romance because nothing in it was really bullying. It was just all her being assaulted the entire book, and it was awful. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. If you want to read the Goodreads review, it's down below. It's not a very good book, and that's all I have to say about it. Next 2 books go together, and that was the King of Hawthorne Prep and the Queen of Hawthorne Prep. I found the Queen of Hawthorne Prep was kind of unnecessary. Didn't really need that book, but I did enjoy it because I did like King of Hawthorne Prep. Gave these both 4 stars. This is about a girl who meets this guy on the beach one summer and sees him for a day and then goes back home and doesn't have any of his contact information. And she ends up, a whole lot of stuff goes down. She ends up moving to this new town because her grandmother has died, and the town is like named after her family. And she goes to this school and everybody is like horrible to her and her brother, and they can't figure out why. And then they find out that there's like this long-standing feud against her family because of some like shady business things that went down like 80 years ago. And so there, one guy in particular from the beach is like a specific jerk to her, and her brother's getting like beaten up at football practice and whatever. Like they're just like going after like both of them all the time. And so she makes a deal with the guy to sort of get him to back off, and it goes from there. Next one was Fear Me by Abbi Reid, and this one was just like something else. I will say this one ends on a cliffhanger, and I did not know that when I went into it, and I wish I had, because there are like 4 or 5 books in this series and I was not anticipating starting a series. I just wanted to read the one book. But it does end on a cliffhanger if you're thinking about reading this book. This one is about a girl who, I don't even know, there's like this guy who has been bullying her for like 10 years, like he's been mean to her, and like since they were 8. And now they're in their senior year of high school, which seems to be like a common thing in these books, but he is just like getting worse with like bullying her, and he thinks that she's framed him for this like drug bust that happened the year before where he ended up getting arrested and spent a year in juvie, and now he's out and back. And he basically tells her, like, you made my life hell for a year, I'm gonna make yours hell for a year, kind of thing. But this one is, like, really intense. So, like, if, like, when they say it's, like, dark, this one, like, definitely is dark. and so if that's not your thing, like, probably don't read this one. I gave this one 3 stars just because I felt like a lot of it was, like, not very believable. Like, within the first 2 chapters, I think there was something that happened that I was just like, I couldn't figure out why they thought that that was logical. Like, it didn't make sense to me at all, and I was like, why are they reacting this way to this when, like, that's like not normal. And that happened a couple times throughout the book where I was like, okay, like, that's not very believable. But other than that, this one was pretty good. It's definitely, like I said, very intense. I had a hard time believing that this guy was 18 throughout the book. A lot of times in my head he was like 25 because I was like, he just didn't seem like an 18-year-old to me. The next book I read was Campus Player by Jennifer Sucevic, and this one was okay. I gave this one 3 stars. It was a very basic, like, football romance. Like, if you're looking for something like that, this is it. It's about, like, a guy who sort of is like the coach's, like, surrogate son, you know, where, like, he comes to family dinners all the time and he's always hanging out with the coach, and he ends up dating the coach's daughter. And so it was, like, really cute, like I said, but it's nothing too special. And the last one I read was Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. I gave this one 3 stars as well, just because I was, like, so conflicted about this one, and I don't think I'd read it again. Not because it was a bad book, but just because it was such a, like, heavy book to read that I don't see myself purposely revisiting it. I'm reading the second book right now in the series, and I do really like that one. It's a lot lighter than this one was. This one deals with a lot of issues if you want to look up, like, the trigger warnings for this one. It is a basketball romance, and I'm not going to tell you anything about it because you literally can't without spoiling the book, and so just go into it blind. You'll probably like it. And so that was everything I read in May. So thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you next time.